to use it through some kind of native interface?
Ah, that's a pretty interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about that. Someone from eBay was interested in having a seaport of this stuff. When they got into it, they realized that you know, there's a lot of, you know, like I said, we're built on the shoulders of giants here. So, you know, in order to do a SAPI in 5,000 lines of code, you got to build on top of some pretty powerful stuff that's not available in C, or might take some work. So I think it's a really good idea. Then it would apply to almost any environment. But then you got, you know, multiple platforms to support and all kinds of porting issues. It's not a bad idea, but it's probably outside the scope of something that I can do myself. I need somebody to really champion that.
Yeah, a lot of the prevailing frameworks use declarative authorization and authentication. So does this sort of force you into a more programmatic way of doing it versus, you know?
Not necessarily. It's an excellent question. I think declarative access control is a great idea. In practice, it's got some difficulties. So, you know, I don't see a lot of people using declarative access control in Java, for instance, because it just doesn't really meet the need. But there's no reason that you couldn't use a combination of this with some declarative way of attaching it to methods and business functions and so on. What we're trying to do with a SAPI is provide a fundamental set of security building blocks. And we want to make them really good and really concrete. And then we expect that people will build on top of that. So, you know, a way of compiling it into a program in a declarative way, great, you can build on top of what we've built. But until you have those foundational building blocks in place that are really good and really high assurance, you might as well not try. I mean, we got to have these things.
One question regarding the validators. There are some things that need to be validated, and they turn up in every kind of web systems. And the killer thing is to validate an email address.
Yeah.
So are you planning on having a kind of a library of good validators?
Yeah, there's actually a whole set of good validators built in. They're all configurable. So they go in that SAPI properties file by that security configuration block. So it makes it very easy to add new types to your validator. So if you want to declare a validator for your company ID, you can very easily declare that as a regex in the file and then use it very easily throughout the code. So we've tried to make it data-driven. The validator is all data-driven.
For access control and the user management piece, what existing enterprise systems can we hook into, for example, for single sign-on, for other existing systems? Can we tap into those, for example, and not use the login, logout functionality and still have access to the user object in the other objects?
Right. So it's an excellent question. You can use any enterprise authentication or access control system. You would need to customize the implementation of the access controller API and the authenticator API, but you can tie it in. So right now, there's a text file-based authenticator and a text file-based access control system, and they're sort of intended as demonstrations. Someone's built a MySQL-based authenticator implementation, so you can go to a back-end database and get those things. It'd be very easy to build an LDAP version of the authenticator to go to your Enterprise Active Directory or whatever. But the idea is that you have to customize those things because every company in here has a separate, different access control and authentication system.
So it should be easy to even tie into, say, externalized authorization systems that are centrally managed with central policies.
Absolutely. You could even invoke a web service. The point is we're trying to make the API exposed to the developer super easy so they don't have to think about it, what happens under the hood.
What's the learning curve for average Java developer with no AppSec background?
Wow, I don't know. We've tried really hard to make this API completely obvious for developers, even if they don't know a lot about security. So for instance, most systems that you look at today have a method called HTML encode or HTML escape or something like that. But think about that function name. It doesn't tell you when to use it. Right? So in a SAPI, that same method is called encode for HTML, or encode for HTML attribute, or encode for JavaScript. And the idea is we're trying to, we've worked hard on the method names to try to make them really obvious for developers about when to use them. I think you still need that coding guideline to tell developers when to use it, but we've tried really hard to simplify it. Personally, I think it's really simple to use, but I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm really not the best person to judge that.
So what would you recommend if I want all developers in my company to start using this? I mean, where do they start?
I think the best thing to do would be to look at the API and then compare it against what you already have in your enterprise. So you may have a logging library that you use or a crypto library that you already use, and you might want to think about, where are the gaps in what we've got? And then, what I want you to do is a little work up front and think about what your enterprise security API looks like. And then once you've decided